Hi everyone, my name is Tanya Hayles, founder of Black Moms Connection, online global village of almost 20,000 moms and nonprofit organization. Today we're here to talk about how we can help our kids cope with change and uncertainty. We have the amazing Dr. Karen Wilson, who is a clinical neuropsychologist, joining us today to help answer some of those questions. We're so glad to have you here with us today, Karen.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
So let's get into the first question. So with the move to virtual or hybrid learning, kids have been presented with a lot of change and uncertainty. Some are thriving outside the rigid structure of school, and others are struggling with the lack of access to resources. What are some ways parents can advocate for their children and get some support?
That's a great question. I think one of the best things that parents can do is to communicate with educators, communicate with your child's teacher about what it is that you're observing, because parents are right now on the front lines observing their children in their learning environment. And so the extent to which parents can communicate what it is that they're seeing in terms of struggle and in terms of strength. So if a child, for example, is really struggling with accessing the curriculum remotely and you see it more with math, then it's really on the parents to really communicate that information to the teacher so that they know where they can support the child who's struggling. And oftentimes the child may not be able to communicate what it is that he's experiencing or she's experiencing, what the difficulties are. And so a parent having that conversation with your child and then being that liaison to communicate the information that you're gathering directly to the teacher in terms of areas of struggle academically, but also the social emotional response to remote learning. For some kids, it's really a struggle to learn in that manner, and it creates a lot of anxiety and it creates a lot of stress. And communicating that information to the teacher can be beneficial as well, so that you can brainstorm how to support children.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There has to be a partnership. I always say, like, you and I are a team to his teachers, and you absolutely are when it comes to the best possible outcomes for your children. So what are some behaviors or challenges might families see if their kids are struggling to cope with change and uncertainty? And what can families do to help in those cases?
Yes, when kids are struggling, it can look so differently in different kids, but sometimes what you'll see is some defiance. You'll see kids who do not want to log into Zoom for a particular class. And it may be that they're experiencing some Zoom fatigue, which a lot of children, a lot of adults, frankly, are. And so I think being in tune to the behaviors that you're seeing that maybe you didn't see before. This may have been a child who loved learning and loved school, and all of a sudden now does not want to engage. And so that is a behavior that you should be mindful of and then make note of and then communicate that information to the teacher. You may also see some regression in some areas where, a younger child may start bedwetting. There might be a lot of tears. There might be a lack of willingness to engage with family members. Maybe a child who spends more time than usual on social media or on electronics. So those are some behaviors that children may exhibit when they're trying to find ways to cope with a difficult situation, with uncertainty. They're trying to keep their spirits up or distract themselves from a situation that's very difficult for them.
Yeah, I can say, my son is 8, and I've seen that in my own home with him in the early days of COVID, a lot of like, can I sleep with you tonight? And those kind of things. And the symptoms and such have all changed from March to what month are we in? November? So yes. I can say I've seen that firsthand for sure. So why do kids who learn and think differently struggle with change and uncertainty more than other kids?
There are a number of kids who think differently, who learn differently, who struggle with executive functioning. And with executive functioning, it's an umbrella term for a lot of different things. But one of the things is being flexible in your thinking. So a lot of kids get stuck in seeing things one way and have a real struggle with kind of thinking what things will look like if the situation changes, or seeing alternative ways of seeing a situation. And so they can get stuck in the loneliness, get stuck in the isolation, get stuck in focusing on what they can't do, and have a hard time kind of switching their focus to things that they can do and things that they can enjoy during this time. So it can be very difficult for kids. The other thing is that there are a lot of emotions that kids are experiencing right now, and adults. There's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, and kids with learning and processing issues often have difficulty with emotional regulation, which is another executive function. And so they're even though they're having a lot of these emotions, this anxiety and stress, and we all do, kids who think differently, who learn differently, may have more trouble kind of regulating the big emotions that they're experiencing. So they have struggled with processing it in a way that allows them to cope with the situation at hand.
Sometimes families have a real fear seeking any type of diagnosis, especially given cultural concerns or fears about potential discrimination or stigma. How can parents or caregivers overcome that fear of seeking support for their kids?
Another great question. And I think for me, and how I communicate this to a lot of parents that I work with, is you have to reframe that to a lot of parents, where it's not about seeking a diagnosis. It's really about seeking understanding of your child's struggle. And with that understanding comes the ability to help the child achieve their full potential and to thrive. And you have to understand the struggle before you can know how to address it. So it's really not about determining whether or not a child has a diagnosis of ADHD or dyslexia or some other neurodevelopmental disorder. It's about understanding why the child is struggling. And then once we understand, then we can determine how to provide support, what that support looks like, so that we can help that student.
So our last question today, some families may be worried about the long-term effects from all these changes, stressors, and uncertainty over the past year. I know I'm definitely one of those parents. But we also know that kids can be pretty resilient and are able to bounce back from challenging situations. What can we do to help kids build some resilience and minimize long-term effects?
Kids have a wonderful ability to adapt and to demonstrate resilience, but resilience is a process. And so while children are adapting and figuring out ways to cope with the situation, it's on us as adults and parents to provide support. And one of the best ways that we can provide support to help kids develop that resilience is to really connect with them, connect with our kids on an emotional level. And now's a time when so many parents are busy, they're multitasking, they're trying to work and parent and oversee distance learning, and it's a lot to do at any given time. But we have to prioritize connection with our kids. And that can be a time where we're sitting side by side, snuggling and reading a book together, connecting with how the day went, doing a lot of different things to really just establish that connection, particularly at a time when they can't connect with their peers or their teachers. It's even more important that we have and establish that connection with our children, because children need to feel connected, they need to feel safe, and they need to feel secure in order to develop that resilience. And that's a way we can do that. The other ways that we can help them develop resilience and to cope better with the situation is to make sure that they're getting adequate sleep at night, because that allows our bodies to heal. It allows us to think more clearly, and it allows us to process information better. It also helps us to regulate our emotions. And as we know, and as I stated before, there are a lot of emotions that everyone is experiencing right now. So making sure that kids are getting adequate sleep, they have a good diet, engaging in mindfulness practices also helps to lower the anxiety, lower the stress that individuals are experiencing, and helps kids to be more resilient. And getting outside, spending some time in nature, that also helps to elevate mood in children and adults. And so finding ways to do those things can also help kids to develop resilience.
Those are wonderful and great tips. I do have and a secondary question to that. Sure. For those parents and families who live on the East Coast in this daylight savings time, I feel like this year it's messing with me way more than it has in the past. So, do you think that we're going to see any types of spikes in terms of mental health, just with like seasonal affective disorder and just the lack of daylight and sunshine, and how that might affect folks, both either the children or the parents.
I think there definitely can be an impact, particularly again when people are isolated. We're still social distancing, we're still not interacting with other people, and we know that loneliness contributes to our mental health. And loneliness and isolation both contribute to depression and sadness and anxiety. And when people can't get the support that they need, it impacts their mood. So I think now is a time where we have to be more creative in terms of finding ways to connect with others and find ways to enhance mood. And it might be in seeking out, again, support from other people. And it may be virtually for now. But finding ways to connect with family members, with friends, virtually, by phone, in a safe, socially distant way. And then also being willing to seek professional support if individuals feel that, they've gotten to a point where it's really the depression, the anxiety, the stress is really impacting their daily functioning. And then that's a time to really reach out for professional help.
Thank you so much, Karen, for being with us today. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone that tuned in learned a ton as well.
Thanks so much for having me, Tanya.
Absolutely. And thanks everyone that tuned in. We'd love to hear from you. How are you handling change and uncertainty during these times? For more expert advice, follow Understood on Facebook, subscribe to their YouTube channel, and reach out and let us know how you're doing in these times. You can also find Black Moms Connection online at blackmomsconnection.com and more great advice from Dr. Wilson at westlaneuro.com. Thank you, everyone, and see you soon.